conferencia muy especial. Es de un invitado internacional que nos va a ilustrar su punto de vista acerca de las perspectivas globales sobre la demanda de minerales estratégicos para la transición energética. Esta conversación estará a cargo del señor Guillaume Pitron. Él es periodista francés, es periodista de investigación y documentalista, y se llevó el premio más importante que hace Le Monde, que es un premio a la investigación económica. Se alzó con este premio a raíz de la redacción del libro La Guerra de los Metales Raros, que es un bestseller. Entonces quiero que por favor recibamos con un fuertísimo aplauso a Guillaume Pitron, que estará con nosotros por los siguientes minutos. Muchísimas gracias por aceptar esta invitación y bienvenido.
Yo hablaré en inglés por el resto de este discurso, pero unas palabras en español. Antes de comenzar, para decir que es un placer y es un honor de ser invitado aquí en Cartagena para hablar en este congreso, y muchísimas gracias a Juan Camilo Nariño por su invitación aquí en Cartagena. Entonces llegué aquí en Colombia hace varias semanas para hacer informes, para realizar informes, y tengo que decirme que la Colombia me gusta mucho. Pero más formalmente, yo soy un periodista de Francia, yo vivo en París, yo escribo libros de geopolítica y yo voy a hablar de los minerales críticos, estratégicos, raros de la transición energética. This is where I turn to English. I like to remind audience when I speak about this subject about a fascinating figure which has been published a couple of years ago by a French research institute, and that figure is that one. For the next 30 years, the humankind will produce and consume more metals and minerals than all the metals and minerals which have been extracted and consumed for the last 70,000 years, since the beginning of humankind. That's an amazing figure. And obviously, these metals will be used in many respects. They will be used for manufacturing planes and rockets. They will be used for building houses and highways, but they also will be used for the energy transition. And copper is one of these metals. You know here copper so well. This is one of the most important metal of the energy transition because it's needed for electricity networks. And same figure, for the next 30 years, we're going to extract from the ground more copper than all the copper we have extracted for the last 70,000 years. And 25 to 40% of that copper will be specifically used for the energy transition. What does these figures tell us? Well, it tells us that energy transition is a metallic transition. That if you want to move away from fossil fuels, basically we need to extract more of metals for making these technologies possible. And for the last years, we have had many figures confirming this reality that we are changing needs in a way. We're moving away from some resources, but we have to replace this need by other resources. You guys know it so well, but you know, the political governance around the world, especially in my continent, I've had no idea about this for many years, so I just didn't know. I'm proud to say that I live in Paris, the place where the COP21 took place, the Paris Agreements, in 2015. But when you look at the Paris Agreement, the 29-page agreement, no one in this paper, in this document, appears the words mine, minerals, natural resources. So we have envisioned like a future ahead in 50 years, but we have no idea until now. We have had no idea how to make that future happen, and that is dig deeper. And now we're suddenly waking up to that, and we're waking up to huge challenges that are coming around them, and that are ecological challenges. Because whether we want it or not, mining always leaves a scar somewhere in the ground. So it has an impact to actually extract these resources. And where I have been as a reporter in China, notably, in the mines of Jiangxi, Heilongjiang, or Inner Mongolia, well, basically, it's not green. It's not green to extract the rare earths and to refine them, and it's not green to extract the graphite and refine it. And you can't talk about green technologies when you look at the way things are being done in China, which is a leader in the extraction and processing of these resources. So it's not because it's green that it's clean. It's not because it's green that it is responsible. It's not because it's green that it is renewable. And people are starting to understand that there is no free lunch. If I want to drive my electric car in Europe, someone has to pay the price for me to drive my zero clean electric car, zero emission and clean electric car. Someone has to pay that price, but we just don't know it. Because in my country and in Europe, in the Western world, we don't have that many mines. There are no mines in France. We have just, left the mines away, and we have no understanding of this reality. This is where you guys arrive. For a while, mining has been seen as the bad guys, because mining is always seen as a dirty industry, bad guys. But suddenly, you become the good guys. You become the people thanks to which actually the energy transition is made possible, because people understand that if I want to drive my electric car, I have to dig deeper in the ground. So suddenly there is like a shift in the way you're being seen as a solution to actually accelerate the energy transition. So that's a very good news. And Latin America can play such an important role here. It can play an important role because, first of all, you can mine in a better way than what I've seen in China. There can be kind of an ecological advantage of actually looking for minerals in Latin America and in Colombia in a better and proper and more ethical way than some things that I can see or study about China or, for example, Indonesia with its nickel. But it's also an opportunity for, obviously, moving down the supply chain and developing your role into the mining space worldwide. The mining transition, the energy transition, is a transition towards Chinese leadership. You know that. We are very much dependent upon Chinese supplies because China is today the leader for the for the extraction and the processing of the resources that it extracts from its ground or gets from other countries. And China has become a leader of the EV battery market because it can secure the resources. So this is a new Chinese leadership here that we are just experiencing. We are just discovering that every energy transition comes with new leaderships. You may remember the 19th century energy transition, coal energy transition. Well, the country leading that transition was Britain, because they would master the extraction of coal, but they would also master the technology for using the coal. That was the steam engine. And then the 20th century came with a new leadership. That came with the leadership of the United States, because they could secure the extraction of the oil on their territory or with Saudi Arabia, and they would master the technology using oil, that is the 4T, the cars, the oil cars. And now we're moving towards a new 21st century leadership with this new energy transition. That is a Chinese leadership, because we need the metals, which China has the leadership, and China has secured the downstream supply chain until being able to produce the batteries of electric cars and the wind turbines and the solar panels and the rare earth permanent magnets. So we understand this new complex rules of the game, this new environment, which is also a geopolitical environment, because consuming countries like European countries are wondering, where are we going to sign agreements with? Which new countries? Are we going to sign agreements with Kazakhstan? Are we going to sign agreements with Mongolia? Are we going to sign agreements with Chile, maybe Colombia, to secure and diversify the resources? So here comes actually a very good opportunity for Latin America and more specifically Colombia, because actually you could offer these resources thanks to your huge potential. Copper in Chile, but also copper in Colombia, nickel in Colombia, but we could talk at the continent stage of resources of nickel and rare earths in Brazil, for example. So this potential is absolutely huge, and you might want to go down the value chain as China does. And one of the big questions, which will be, remaining open in the future, we'll talk back about it later, is how do I actually, get the best added value out of the minerals in order to sell added value finished products and to keep my added value on my territory. But that is a huge opportunity. And obviously, these opportunities are just taking shape right now, especially since Europe, I talk about my continent, doesn't really want to mine. We have just passed a Critical Raw Materials Act, and basically the CRM Act, which was just passed by the European Commission a couple of weeks ago, 2 months ago, says we will supply, we want that 10% of the metals for the energy transition may be extracted from our European ground by 2030. But that leaves open the 90% remaining. Where are we going to get them? So there is such a potential for mining countries to supply this demand, which is absolutely huge from Western countries and the rest of the world. The thing is, well, there are drawbacks, as you know. There are some difficulties here turning this opportunity into this potential into real opportunities. And I will not get back in more details because you know this so much and much better than I do about the drawbacks and challenges of going from claims to practice. Basically, Latin America underperforms in terms of production of critical strategic rare metals comparing to its huge reserves. And that is due to many reasons, obviously. Probably a lack of understanding of the underground. In Colombia, as you know, there are like 1% of the territory which is being occupied by active mining industry. But that leaves largely open the question of understanding and getting to know better the rest of the potential, of the mining potential of the country, and we can enlarge this analysis to the rest of the continent. There is a lack of infrastructures, there is a lack of extraction and processing facilities. This is a reality. And also there is a more complex, regulatory environment that doesn't make things very easy for you, and that brings a lot of concerns. And this is not an easy question to answer, to be very honest, because how do you pride yourself in Colombia as being the second most biodiverse country in the world? How do you pride yourself of welcoming the COP16 in Cali next October and November, and at the same time make sure that you can offer a green transition and a fair mining transition to produce green technologies? So how do you find a balance between regulations which are necessary to protect such an environment and the necessity to be competitive? And this is not an easy question, it's not an easy answer. And we can see here that we are, in a way, on a ridgeline between these two, in a way, contradictory and competing interests. In a way, we are in the energy 2.0. The energy transition to 1.0 was the Paris Agreement. Everyone was falling into each other's arms. Wonderful, we have made this agreement possible. We have signed it, we cry. That was the first chapter of the energy transition. The second energy transition is, okay, but how do you make things really green? How do you make it so that you're not only green when you drive your car, but that you're green when you mine the metals for the batteries of a car? How do you make it green when you process it? How do you make it green when you transport it? And how do you make it green when eventually, at the end of the lifespan of your car or your battery or your solar panel, you potentially recycle the resources? So that necessary 2.0 chapter of the transition brings about the question of making it green during all the life cycle analysis of the product. And this brings lots of regulations that need to be put in place, and that somehow contradict the agenda of being more competitive. And I really get that. Another thing is the mining world, the mining space, always suffers a somehow bad reputation around the world. It's always an issue to mine somewhere, and it's always an issue to open a mine somewhere. There can be lots of judiciary processes, local communities disagreeing, and the reputation is pretty much known. There is a standard which you might be aware of, which is Standard & Poor scoring, ESG scoring, which says that the mining industry today is scoring 52 out of 100 in terms of ESG scoring. And the average for every industry around the world, every business around the world is 62, but the mining is 52. So it's less than the average. And so that brings the question of how to make the mining industry more in line with its new role of making the world greener. But how do you want to make the world greener if you're not green yourself and clean yourself for producing the virgin metals for your electric cars? And so we come up with this reputational issue which actually impairs investments. And there is this paradox that we're going to need so many mines, we're going to need so much investments until 2030, 35, 40. I have this figure in mind. $350 billion around the world will have to be invested until 2030 just for copper and nickel extraction and processing. This is huge. The expectations are huge, but the sector, for mining in general, but more specifically for these metals, is underfunded. Companies don't fund because they don't find a way to fund in a reliable way to make sure that their business model is taking shape, is guaranteed. So in a way, there is a need for metal. We need the metals, but there is no desire for metals. There is a need, but there is no desire. And I see here this paradox. So I wanted to stress in the first point that reality that the energy transition is a metals transition. That was my first point. We're moving away from oil, gas, but we are moving towards a new dependency. You don't want cocaine, you have heroin. We are newly addicted to new resources. And energy transition means more extraction. And the second point is that it comes with opportunities, but these opportunities also come up with hurdles. So how do we make like a synthesis? How do we find a balanced path between the opportunities, but also the challenges? And is there a path for a Colombian thriving and competitive mining industry, especially in the face of such a growing needs worldwide coming from all over the world for your metals, for the metals of the Latin American continent, notably? And one thing that comes often into discussions, and I've said it, is regulation. Too many regulation, hard to find a competitive way of making business. It's such a growingly complex regulatory environment. How can we be competitive to other countries is a perfectly legitimate question. Let me just try to answer this question with my European perspective. This is what I can bring to you because I'm a European. In Europe, for the last 5 years, especially at the level of in Brussels, at the level of European Parliament or the European Commission, we have been experiencing a flow of environmental regulations being put in place for the last 5 years, for the last mandate of the European Commission. Dozens of environmental regulations. And one of them, for example, has been just very recently passed by the EU Parliament, and this is a directive on corporate sustainability due diligence. And basically, this directive says to European companies, you have to know where your minerals come from. You have to get a very precise idea of in what conditions they have been extracted. And basically, you have to map your upstream supply chain. So until now, you could say, listen, I'm just buying to my, N-1, and that's pretty much it. And I don't need to know further. And most of the companies had not been further than looking maybe at the refiner, -3, but the mine is -7. And now the European regulations require that you know you're -7. And you have another directive which is going to be passed in 2025, a fascinating directive whose name is the CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Basically, this directive says you have to know the benefits and the cost of your business from an economic viewpoint, from a social and human viewpoint, and from an environmental viewpoint. So whatever you get positively on the one hand, you might lose it on the other two chapters. And you have to have a larger appreciation of what your costs and benefits are, taking into consideration social, human, environmental criteria. But what does that mean for the companies? What does that really mean? Well, I know it because I also, as more than a journalist, I run an advisory company. And this company is basically advising other companies on their strategy to have ethical supply chains. And I see French, European companies coming to see me, I've seen them for the last months, and saying, listen, we have to know where the minerals come from. We just really have to know where they come from and in which conditions they've been extracted. So can you tell me where my gallium comes from for my ships? Can you tell me where my gold comes from for my necklaces when I'm a luxury company? And these companies require that we try to find at -7. And that is so difficult to do, almost impossible. I know few companies in Europe that can do so, or that really insist on being able to do so. One of these companies, you may know it, is named Fairphone. It's a phone manufacturing company in Netherlands, and they pride themselves for, investigating their supply chains. But beside that, it's very hard, but regulations require it. They require that you know your environment. Media are coming to the stage. NGOs are coming to the stage. Human Rights Watch, Greenpeace, Human Rights International, lots of NGOs, Global Witness in the UK, are producing reports and regarding the way metals have been extracted for clean technologies or for IT. And we have companies haunted, literally haunted by the fact that they may be entangled into a huge scandal because one day an NGO comes, knock at their door and say, hey, we have a proof that you have actually used metals which have been extracted by children in the Democratic Republic of Congo for your batteries. And the company answers, I didn't know. And the NGO answers, but if I know, how could you not know? So basically, we are in this new context of companies requiring to figure it out. And this is where it's probably an opportunity. I see it as an opportunity for Colombia and for Latin America. Because basically, this environment on the demand side requires, in my view, that we take a larger, a more in-depth, a more complex look at what competitivity really means. If we have a narrow understanding of what competitivity is, basically, I look at my financial returns and I say, I'm competitive or I'm not competitive to the Chinese or to the Indonesians. And let me make sure you will never be competitive to the Chinese. And actually, you don't want to be competitive to the Chinese in that respect because you don't want to have cancer villages around the rare earth processing facilities in Inner Mongolia, northwest of Beijing, where people are dying of cancer that there is no hospital to treat them. So there is no possibility to be competitive to the Chinese in such conditions. So how do you enlarge what we call competitivity by taking into consideration new criteria for competitivity that come out of our regulations on the demand side? And this is where two very important things come on the stage. And the first one is fair material sourcing, and the second one is stability of supplies. Companies in Europe see the world changing, and they see that they prefer not to get such source of minerals as long as they don't get entangled into a scandal, and that hampers their reputation, which is a huge intangible asset. They might not be that ready to take any of those risks in the future, they have been able to, because, once again, the media, NGO, social, regulatory environment is changing. This is the first thing. And the second thing is they are desperately looking for stability of supplies. We Europeans, we are just desperately looking for friends. We live in such a changing world. We don't know who our friends are today. The Russians are not our friends anymore. Some African countries are not the friends of France anymore. United States, we don't even know if they are our friends anymore. We are desperately looking for amigos, for friends. And where the friendship comes, if countries supplying me are able to tell me, I guarantee you a stability of supplies. Will China be competitive comparing to you in terms of fair, ethical supply chain? No, but this is where you can be competitive to the Chinese, because we require it, we on the demand side. Will China be competitive to you in terms of security of supplies? No, because, as you know, they put some bans on exports of rare earths. Sometimes we're not happy with their client countries. But this is where you can be competitive to the Chinese, by offering to enlarge the criteria of what we call competitivity, having a more complex, in-depth approach of what that means, and putting into the balance approaches, dimensions, where actually you can make a competitive advantage. And that implies to bring new narratives, and obviously 3 narratives here: fair supply chains, stability of supplies, and forecast capabilities. This is so much what the demand side today is requiring, and this is what you can offer, and this is when you can make a difference. Let me just finish by telling you that all the time businesses look for new ways of producing value, of creating values. But today, in that task of creating new ways of making value in the future, today more than ever, and however daunting, crazy, exciting, difficult, but necessary is that task, we need to commonly rethink in Colombia, over the continent, across the continent, the oceans. We need to collectively rethink from the upstream chain to the downstream chain, from the mining industry to the laboratory, our commonly shared values. Creating values by rethinking our commonly shared new values from upstream to downstream. Muchísimas gracias por su atención.